So you're thinking about buying an investment property along the Oregon coast. I'm going to talk to you about everything that you need to know to get started. Regulations, HOAs, ROI. We're going to cover it all in this video. And maybe you're just somebody that's thinking about buying a property along the Oregon coast. Doesn't necessarily have to be an investment. There'll be some good information for you in here as well. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to Living on the Oregon Coast. I'm your host, Seth Marchant, licensed real estate broker in Oregon and Washington. Or if you're new to this channel, Living on the Oregon Coast, we show you what it's like to eat, sleep, play, all the pros and cons of living on the Oregon Coast. We've got hundreds of videos on our channel covering just about every town, at least all the larger towns along the Oregon coast, with tons of driving footage, drone footage, pros and cons, cost of living, all the types of videos that will give you information that will help you to make your decision about where the right place for you to live is on the Oregon coast. So if you want to see more videos like that, you can visit our channel or make sure and subscribe to this channel. That way you'll get notified every time we drop a new video. And if you're somebody that's thinking about taking the next steps in buying a home along the Oregon coast, whether it's your first or your last, I invite you to call, text, email. You can hit the QR code. That'll take you to our website. You can find all of our contact information in the description below of this video. However you want to get in touch, no question is too big or too small. We love to hear from you. All right, so in this video, I'm going to cover most of the towns along the Oregon coast from the north coast down to the central coast and go over those regulations. So if you've got a town in mind, you should come away with a pretty good idea as to what it is that you're looking at as far as getting a short-term rental in that particular town and being able to actually legally rent it out. But first, I'm going to start with some quick questions and some definitions, some questions, some things that commonly come up for people that reach out to us, because this is a pretty common topic. There are a fair amount of people that are buying investment properties along the Oregon coast. It is a good place, at least in the view of many, to invest in real estate. And of course, I'll give you the disclaimer. This is not investment advice or accounting advice, although I'm going to give you some advice, and we are going to talk about investment properties, specifically short-term rentals. Why short-term rentals? And what is a short-term rental? Well, most towns or municipalities are going to define a short-term rental as renting to a tenant anything under 30 days. And why the distinction between those two things? Why the distinction between somebody that's renting for, say, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, or somebody that rents for 6 months or 12 months? Well, from the city's perspective, the short-term renters are going to have a different impact. They're going to bring a lot of tourism. They're going to be in and out more. They're going to require more services like cleaning services. Might be more likely to violate ordinances like noise ordinances or having too many people or too many vehicles on a property. So from the city's view, there's the distinction between somebody that's renting short-term and somebody that's renting long-term. And for you, for the property owner, there's going to be a distinction as well. Short-term rentals can be more lucrative. There can be more upside to short-term rentals. There can also potentially be more downside. And there, of course, can be more work with short-term rentals and maintaining them. There's typically different regulations for short-term rentals. Along the Oregon coast, if you're going to rent something beyond 29 days, so 30 days or more, there's typically very, very few regulations. It'll probably be pretty easy for you to get a permit to do that just about anywhere and not have any sort of issue doing that. Renting less than 30 days at a time comes with a lot more regulations in most cities and counties. But why all of the regulations? And again, that's what I'm going to get to here in a moment, just kind of going through town by town. And as a disclaimer, whenever you're watching this video, know that these regulations have changed a lot in the past, and presumably they can change and will change in the future. So if you're watching this video sometime down the road, 6 months, a couple years down the road, just know that some of this information may become outdated. And again, I invite you to call, text, email, however you want to get in touch. Any question that you have about this stuff is great. Feel free to reach out at any time. So why all of the regulations? And why are they going to be different for every single town? Well, the Oregon coast is a popular place to vacation, so that has prompted a lot of people to use real estate as short-term rentals. And with that, comes some opposition. And so local officials, local elected officials, local municipalities, cities, counties create regulations to offset some of these things and make things feel a little bit more balanced. You hear complaints from locals about this making homes more unaffordable when you have a lot of people from outside of the area coming in and purchasing homes as an investment. And so each town is going to be a little bit different about how they feel about short-term rentals. Some are going to be more welcoming, and that's sort of a known thing that short-term rentals are very common in some particular towns. And kind of like the sentiment from the locals is that they are very welcoming of having as many short-term rentals or having an abundance of short-term rentals in a town. And then there's going to be other towns that are very, very restrictive. So you're going to find that the regulations really can vary a lot from town to town. It just depends on how the town feels about short-term rentals. Now, if you're talking about somewhere outside of city limits, then your regulations are going to default to the county. So I'm also going to go through very quickly at the end of this the county regulations for Clatsop County, Tillamook County, and Lincoln County. Beyond that, you also have HOAs to contend with. You're not going to find a ton of HOAs in communities with single-family homes, but of course there's a lot of condos, apartments, attached type of units along the Oregon coast, which almost always are going to have HOAs, and some of these HOAs will prohibit short-term rentals. Most of them are also going to define short-term rental as anything under 30 days. In some cases, I have seen up to 90 days. And then the other thing that you're going to take into account with these things is the zoning. The zoning is largely going to determine whether or not you can at least get a short-term vacation rental permit. Don't think that just because a property is zoned in an area that allows for short-term rentals that you'll be able to get a permit, no questions asked. There's going to be a handful of other things that you need to do as well. Typically going to need to have a city business license. I've seen those vary from anywhere from $200 a year to $900 a year, I think is kind of the upper end that I've seen. There's going to be a handful of requirements that the property is going to have to be able to fulfill in order for them to grant you this pass. So just as an example, oftentimes you're going to need 2 parking places. Sometimes you're going to have a required street parking. Sometimes you're going to have a required a certain amount of garage or certain garage size that will accommodate a certain amount of parking. You may need to have certain shrubs, trees, or bushes on the property. It might be the case that you can't just have all concrete and roof and siding. You might actually need to have some bushes or shrubs. So there's going to be a bunch of different little rules and regulations for every single city. And how do you figure these things out? Well, of course, you can always call the city, and they're typically very helpful. Now, as a real estate broker, oftentimes I am doing this kind of initial diligence for our clients. So oftentimes it'll start with me speaking to the city to figure out if a property can even qualify for a short-term vacation rental permit and answering all of those questions. If we do get to the process where you write an offer for a property and you're going to close on something, we do always suggest that you call the city as well so you hear all the information firsthand. But starting out, it's typically us that are doing the fact-finding for you. So the city or the county is going to have to allow permits. It's going to have to be zoned in the right place. It's going to have everything that fits all of the rules. There's going to have to be an HOA that allows it, or maybe there's not an HOA. So you can see how this can get a little bit tricky when it comes to finding a short-term vacation rental permit home that you can use along the Oregon coast as an investment property. Now, one thing to know about these permits, once you get one of these permits, it is very rare that they can convey. In other words, that you can transfer it along when you sell the home. There's very few places along the Oregon coast that allow that. Some are capped at, they'll only allow you to transfer their permit once. So in most places, in order to gain a short-term vacation rental permit, you're going to have to apply and be approved through the city. It's rare that you're going to be able to find a home and actually gain a permit with that home upon the purchase. Now, how about ROI? It's a question sometimes, that's at the forefront of people's minds. What is your return on investment? Or the question might be, is this a good investment? And the frank answer is that is a personal finance question. I don't know if that like sounds like a cop out to you, but we've helped dozens of people along the Oregon coast relocate, buy second homes, buy all sorts of properties along the Oregon coast. And a lot of people work with us because they appreciate our frank and forthcoming nature. So we hear that a lot. So I'm always going to kind of give it to you the way that it is. So unfortunately, there's not a very easy way to necessarily answer that question. Now, some people, specifically investors, when they think about that question, they might think about something called a cap rate. A cap rate is just a simple formula that gives you a number that gives somebody kind of an idea as to what their return on a particular property might be. Cap rates are going to be easier when you're talking about properties that are not as fungible, meaning if you've got a lot of properties that are very similar, like condos, so it doesn't work as well when you're comparing apples to oranges. So if you're comparing like single family homes, each home's a little bit different. The lot's a little bit different. They've got different views. They're in a different neighborhood. You're comparing apples to oranges. So you don't hear cap rate too much when these types of properties are advertised along the Oregon coast. Now, we can help you out with the math. We can help you to understand the numbers, but is it a good investment? The answer to that question is always going to be, it depends on your personal finances. It's going to be a good investment. Some things might be a good investment for some people, might not be as good of an investment as other people. And the personal finance equation is going to have different variables for everybody. So one example of that may be that for some people, it may be more of a tax write-off than other people. For some people that are higher income W-2 high income earners, like maybe a doctor or a lawyer, for example, somebody that's maybe making at least a couple $100,000 a year, which means that they're paying tens of thousands of dollars in taxes. There are ways to relieve your tax burden. In other words, how much taxes you owe when you purchase real estate as an investment. And again, this is not any sort of advice, not investment advice, not accounting advice, but that number of which you can write off and lessen your tax burden has increased as a percentage recently, higher than it was a couple of years ago, and should be that way for the next 3 years or so. So I've had at least a couple people this past year that were buying investment properties specifically because of the tax advantages, because they wanted to offset some of their tax burden from having higher income. So just as one example, the calculus is going to be different for everybody because the variables are going to be different for everybody. So we can kind of help you out with some of the math, but really at the end of the day, just know, is buying a investment property a good decision for me and my finances? That question is going to be different for everybody. It's going to be different for every single property. Real estate sort of traditionally over the long term has typically had very good tax advantages. So for that reason, yes, you don't need to as closely maybe look at the P&L and understand the numbers, understand the cash flow, the expenses, and things like that, because tax advantages are just so good that it's hard for you to lose when you're kind of getting into the minutia of like the P&L and some of those numbers. So that's, and I'm kind of getting long-winded. That's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. I'm going to get to the towns in just a moment. I've got a few tips and tricks for you at the end as well. But that's probably more of a longer conversation. If you want me to elaborate a little bit more on that, again, I invite you to reach out, call, text, email. Of course, if you're thinking about buying an investment property, probably a good idea to consult with a CPA. Now I'm going to run you through the towns real quick. I've got a handful of notes for each one of these towns. Again, they're all sort of a little bit different. One thing also to know as far as like rules and regulations, if you've never done this before, again, you probably want to speak to a CPA. You're probably going to be paying taxes on this type of thing quarterly. So when you're a business owner, you typically would pay taxes, estimated taxes every quarter. A lot of these short-term rentals are going to require somebody that is managing them. And usually that person has to be within a smaller radius of that location. So it can't be like 100 miles away, hours and hours away. So it's kind of typically has to be somebody that's local and available 24/7. So you may need a short-term rental or some sort of vacation rental property management company, which there's quite a few of them along the Oregon coast. Vacasa is probably the largest one that you might be familiar with. They're a national company. Meredith Lodging is a more of a local, larger company. And then you've got lots of mom and pop as well, too. Okay, so real quickly, I'm not going to read you every single bullet point on these. I'm just going to kind of give you the rough overview of these towns, and then we'll go with counties and then a few tips and tricks for you here at the end. All right, Astoria. So Astoria right now, there is some distinction in some of these towns between what type of short-term rental is it. Is it a rental where the owner is living on the property, which is also kind of traditionally been known as like a bed and breakfast, also known as like a homestay, which is that second line that you see down there, homestay lodging. So right now, Astoria effectively is not giving out short-term rental permits in anything that's zoned residential. So they are giving out permits for homestay, so the owner has to be on site. If you can find a single-family home or some sort of property, like a condo or an attached unit that's zoned commercial, you can get a short-term permit in Astoria. Warrenton, which is just to the west of Astoria, is very similar in that they also prohibit short-term rentals in residential zones. Not going to find a ton of single-family homes or homes that you could rent out or condos or anything like that in commercial areas in Warrenton. Probably exists, but I haven't seen much of it. Warrenton, like Astoria, does also allow homestay. We're going to move down to the south and continue on to the south. Gearhart, pretty simple with Gearhart. They are prohibited in basically all zones with the exception of R3. And R3 is mostly a handful of condos. And I believe some of those condos are also going to have some regulations centered around the HOA. So you will find short-term rentals in Gearhart, like say if you're looking on an Airbnb, but most of those have been grandfathered in. Going to be very difficult, if not next to impossible, to get anything right now in Gearhart. Lots of cases when you do have regulations change, they do typically get grandfathered in. Maybe make myself a little bit smaller here. All right, so just know that if you do ever get a short-term rental permit and some of the regulations or something changes that doesn't allow for permits anymore, from what we've seen in the past, you get grandfathered in. So I wouldn't worry too much about potentially losing a license. Of course, I can't make you any promises, but that's what I've seen in the past. Now, Seaside is also going to be a little bit unique in that they do allow short-term rentals, but in a particular area, and that area is mostly defined as, if you look at a map, this river that goes through Seaside is called the Nicanicum River, and this road right here, 12th Avenue, kind of everything that's south of 12th and west of the Nicanicum is an area that's allowed for short-term vacation rental permits, and it's approved based on density. So the city's going to look at how many other short-term rentals are currently in the area, and they will make a determination based on that. Now with condos, and that's for single-family homes, with condos, there is no density measurement that might prohibit you from getting a license. All right, just south of that, Cannon Beach. So Cannon Beach currently prohibits short-term vacation rentals. There is no homestay. There is one exception, and they're called 14-day permits, in which you can get a permit and you can rent to somebody within a 14-day period. So you rent to somebody, whether they're renting for 1 day or 14 days, you have to wait another 14 days before you can rent to somebody again. So you're looking at maybe at max, like 2 people a month, maybe about 24 rentals a year. Cannon Beach is one of the more popular places along the Oregon coast. It's a pretty small place. So they currently do have a couple, maybe a couple 190, something like that, short-term rental permits that have been grandfathered in. Some of them don't have an expiration. Some of them have a 5-year expiration. So you can still find a handful of short-term rentals in Cannon Beach, but these are all been grandfathered in. And this place is very restrictive because it's one of the more popular places. So you kind of find that it's sort of commensurate. The more popular the place is, the more restrictive some of the regulations have become. Just south of that, though, is Manzanita. Manzanita does currently offer short-term rental permits in certain places, zoned residential, specifically R4. You can also get a short-term rental permit in some places that are zoned commercial. And the rest of the areas that are currently zoned residential, At the time that I'm making this, there's a wait list of 13 people, which is not many. Other places that have wait lists, there's some places, that they're going to have like 50, 60, 70 people, 100 people, 200 people. So how long does 13 people take? It's kind of hard to guess, but we're not talking about years. Might take maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year for 13 people, but definitely not years. That's considered definitely a shorter wait list. Just south of that, Rockaway Beach, which has kind of historically been known as one of the more friendly short-term vacation rental places as far as having fewer regulations, lower fees. Right now there is a wait list, and when I spoke to them last, I think you were looking at like maybe a year to a year and a half, just kind of based on the length of the current list, which I think it had like maybe 90 people or something like that on it, and how long it typically they see it take to get through, say, 90 people or so. And just south of that, Lincoln City. Now, as a reminder, I'm just going town by town. If you're looking at a map, all of those smaller towns that you're seeing on there that I have not yet mentioned, those are unincorporated areas. And those unincorporated areas are going to default to county rules, of which I will get to in just a moment. Now, Lincoln City is also similar to like a Cannon Beach in that it's been very, very restrictive in the past. There are a lot of areas that are zoned in Lincoln City that will allow for a short-term rental permit that have dwellings on them, structures that will allow for rentals. A lot of condos, for example. You can find some single-family homes, but mostly condos. But aside from that, getting a vacation rental permit in some place that's zoned residential, they set a cap in the past, and they are well beyond the cap, and probably won't get below the cap anytime in the near future. So getting a short-term vacation rental permit in Lincoln City, somewhere zoned residential, not going to be seeing that anytime in the near future, but there are a lot of possibilities with other zoning. And Lincoln City is a big area. So if you wanted to get into Lincoln City with a short-term rental, you can definitely do it, but it's just going to be tricky to do so. Just south of that, Depot Bay, also a pretty restrictive place, typically, historically. Right now, not giving out any short-term vacation rental permits, with the exception of there's going to be some condos and some bed and breakfast or homestays in certain zones. There is a new subdivision in Depot Bay, a larger subdivision, which is not that common along the Oregon coast. It kind of sits back up in the hills. It's called Depot Hills. That will also be able to actually gain a short-term rental permit. They've started on those. They're still under construction. They're going to be under construction for a while. It's a combination of single-family homes and attached. So if you did want something in an area that's a little bit more unique, that's not going to have as many short-term rental permits, that's in a great area along the Oregon coast, that's also a new property where you might not have to worry about maintenance as much, that could be a very good possibility for you. Just south of Depot Bay, we get into Newport, which Newport essentially does not give out any short-term vacation rental permits, with the exception of there are a handful of places that are zoned specifically for commercial or commercial recreational that do allow for short-term vacation rental permits. Nye Beach is a name that probably a lot of people are familiar with that have heard of Newport before. Also a few places around the bayfront, but without those exceptions, you're not going to get a short-term vacation rental permit in Newport. There are some bed and breakfast or homestay or home share possibilities, though. Just south of that, Waldport. Waldport is one of the easiest places to get a short-term vacation rental permit. It's been that way for a long time. It'll probably be that way for a long time. Very short-term vacation rental permit friendly. Very quick and easy to get a license. Fees tend to be a little bit less than some of the other places. And then just south of that, you've got Yachats, which does not allow short-term vacation rental permits. They do allow homestay, I forget what they call it, bed and breakfast, whatever it is where it's owner-occupied. And that owner also has to live there for at least 6 months out of the year. So not really going to be any opportunities, and you're not going to find, I don't think you can do the commercial thing where if you have a home in a commercial area, that's going to work either. So effectively, you don't really have any investment properties in Yachats. They've tried to phase those out. They're all going to be the homestay, bed and breakfast type of situation. Owner occupied, have to be there for at least 6 months. And that's the southernmost town in Lincoln County. Figured I'd throw Florence in there as well. I think Florence is maybe kind of the cutoff. And why do I say Florence? And what kind of why is that the cutoff? Well, Florence is directly west of Eugene. It's maybe about an hour drive or so. Once you get south of Florence, you don't have, if you look at a map, the 101 parallels the I-5, and a lot of the tourism that occupies these short-term investment properties come from the valley: Eugene, Corvallis, Salem, and Portland. And all four of those towns are all roughly anywhere from an hour to about 2 hours most drive, all the way up to Astoria. So Portland's got Astoria, Seaside, Cannon Beach, a couple hours away. Salem goes to Lincoln City in about an hour or so, Corvallis to Newport, and then Eugene to Florence. So all of these towns that we've kind of covered are about a couple of hours away from a large population center. Whereas when you get south of Florence, coming from the valley in the southern Oregon, you've got the Rogue National Forest. There's no straight shot as the crow flies. So oftentimes it could take like 3 hours, 4 hours. The southern Oregon coast is smaller. It's quieter. Doesn't have the same type of tourism that the central to the northern Oregon coast has. So would you have less competition if you bought a vacation rental property down there? Yes, but you're also going to have less market to go after. So kind of a double-edged sword, but Florence is going to kind of be the cutoff for that. So Florence, which by the way is in Lane County, they've also got the distinction between owner-occupied and non-owner occupied. And Florence right now is just allowing it in specific zones. So there's a multifamily zone, commercial zone, tourist zone. So prohibited in those single family, low density, like R1, which is going to be like the common type of residential zone. So you can get short-term rentals, or you can do the homestay. You can do the homestay in a lot of places. You can get short-term in a handful of places. A lot of places, though, the typical R1 zoning is going to be prohibited for Florence. Now, let's get to the counties real quick. So Clatsop County, where Astoria, Seaside, Cannon Beach, Gearhart, Warrenton, all those towns I covered at the beginning. Clatsop County is going to be one of the more short-term vacation rental permit friendly counties. Pretty easy to get. There's no cap. The fees aren't too bad. So any kind of like smaller area that's unincorporated, like a Surf Pines, for example, which is in Warrenton, unincorporated. Any area that's outside one of the cities in Clatsop County is going to fall to these regulations. So if you're just outside of like a Seaside, for example, or a Cannon Beach, it's going to usually be a little bit easier falling to the regulations of the county. Now, just south of that is Tillamook County, and Tillamook County, very similarly, is also going to be very short-term rental permit friendly. And there's actually a lot of great little towns in Tillamook County, like Oceanside, Neatarts, Neskowin, Pacific City. Tillamook County has a lot of really great little towns right on the ocean, lots of places that have great ocean views that are going to be unincorporated, that's going to be pretty easy for you to get a short-term rental permit. And then finally, south of that, Lincoln County, I'm just going to take you to their website, actually. So Lincoln County is going to be the most restrictive, and probably fitting that you've got the red and blue sirens at the very top here. And that is because I think we are on the sheriff's website. So, of course, you can read this for yourself. Just Google search Lincoln County short-term rental permit. So there was a series of regions that were created about a year ago, and a number of licenses that were allowed and the number of licenses that were actually out there. And so, for example, in Region 1, and I'll take you to the map here in just a moment, they have to get below 42 licenses before they can start giving out licenses again. Now, again, so this is for the county. So this is for all the unincorporated areas in Lincoln County, and there is a wait list. And here's what the map looks like. Region 1 is up here where Lincoln City is. Region 2 is down here right through the middle of Depot Bay, right down into Newport. Region 3 goes down towards just south of Newport where South Beach is. Region 4 into Waldport. Region 5 down into Yachats. And then Region 6 or Region 7 are both inland right here, which is the reason why the two that are kind of right at their cap, Region 6 and Region 7, are probably the areas that are not quite as popular. You're not right there on the water. So you see these regions that are more popular, like Region 1, where Lincoln City is, or Region 5, where Yachats unincorporated is. Again, so this is just right outside of city limits. They're going to allow 7 licenses. They've got 80 that are out there so far. So any unincorporated area in Lincoln County is going to take quite a while before you can get a short-term rental permit. All right, now a few tips and tricks for you that I mentioned. This website, airdna.co, this is a good website. And I'm just going to take this is a good website for helping you to understand some numbers. I just took a random home that's for sale in Seaside, and this is going to give you a bunch of different data. So there's that cap rate that I mentioned. Again, that may or may not mean anything to some people, may or may not be important. Again, back to the question of ROI, or is this a good investment for you? The answer is really different for everybody because the calculus is so different for everybody, but maybe having some numbers for some people will kind of help you to better digest some of these things. So this is a great website to understand these different types of metrics that you might be considering when you're actually looking at the bottom line. So you just plug in the address like you saw that I did, and it's going to give you a bunch of information: operating expenses, net operating income, revenue, occupancy rate, all these different things like that. When it comes to these types of different numbers, professional investors, sometimes they're going to be, some people might be looking for numbers that are good so that they can feel confident and comfortable that they're going to get a good return and they're not going to have to worry about things too much. Other people sometimes are looking for numbers that aren't that good. They're maybe looking for a property that they're not going to have to pay a premium for, a property that isn't maybe getting a great return, that maybe they can put some money into and add some value to and fix it up and increase the value of the property, increase the cash flow. And so even between investors, you're not necessarily looking for a property that is a premium property that has the best numbers. The type of property, that's right for you is just going to be different for everybody. But this is a great website, like I mentioned, that can kind of help you to at least get started with understanding some of the data if you're maybe more of a data-driven person. And then another thing I would suggest you would do, I'm just at Airbnb. I typed in an area, I think like Astoria or Gearhart is somewhere like where I started. But you've got this little map right here on the right. Let me switch myself over. You've got this little map over here on the right that will show you roughly, how many areas. Let's just scroll in here to Gearhart. So roughly there's maybe 74 homes on Airbnb in Gearhart. And so something that can help you with is it can give you an idea of competition. Now, I mentioned Gearhart only currently allows in R3, which is right over here somewhere. This one might be in R3. These are ones that have just been grandfathered in. But 70 some properties. If you go down here to a Seaside, 368 homes. So that'll kind of give you an idea of an area and what the competition might look like. Might tell you a little bit more about what the market is like too. You can see Warrenton. Warrenton's not necessarily a small area. It's not necessarily smaller than Seaside, but there's only 22 homes in this area. And so what can you gather from that? Well, Seaside is a more attractive area for people that are looking to come for the weekend from places like Portland, right down here, than a Warrenton is. So sometimes to get a feel for the market just very quickly and roughly, when it comes to short-term rentals, I like to just go to Airbnb and get to their map and see how many homes are in a given area and see, is that area going to be very dense with homes and thus very competitive, and probably because there's a very strong market for short-term rentals there? Or is it going to be very sparsely distributed, maybe because they're hard to get short-term rental permits there, or maybe it's just a place that not a lot of people are traveling to? So I know all of that was very long-winded. I hope that helps you. And again, I invite you to call, text, email, any questions at all about whether it's a short-term rental, vacation rental, investment property, second home, first home, last home, whatever, any type of property that you're interested in purchasing along the Oregon coast, go ahead and get in touch with us. And of course, if you want to see more videos about what it's like to live along the Oregon coast, make sure and subscribe to this channel. And if anything in this video helped you, if you like short-term rentals, give me a thumbs up, hit that like button. It lets me know I'm doing a good job. And until next time, take care, everyone.